Okay, well, hello everyone, and welcome to this little tutorial. And in this lesson, I'm going to be teaching you how to paint a white rose in acrylic. So, roses are kind of a little bit more of a challenge, but this is a kind of a more, a garden rose, so it has still a lot of structure, but it's not as stiff as those grocery store um, roses, so I picked that one, and that reference photo is royalty free off of Unsplash. So I will post the reference photo and everything to the Patreon channel. For those of you who are members of my Patreon, you get tutorials like this for $10 a month, little acrylic and oil demos that are kind of short and inspirational. So feel free to click the link in the description to check that out more. And so today I've got out this is a Masterson Stay Wet palette. So this special paper kind of absorbs water and it keeps the acrylic paint wet. I have a little video on my YouTube channel that describes how those work and how to properly use them. And you can get them at Michael's or Blick Art. Then I got out this little spritzer bottle. I still like to kind of spritz the acrylic paint while I paint. And then this is just to show you, mainly I use golden acrylic paint. So, and I have a link to my website, which, you can see kind of my supplies in picture form. I've got everything sort of described there. So, okay, to start out, when I paint a white rose, I kind of want to have something down on the background. So because this is for beginners, I'm going to sort of sketch. Normally I can kind of wing it, but what I'll do is I'll just sort of use a little bit of this transparent brown oxide. And the colors I've got out, by the way, are white, Indian yellow, yellow ochre, transparent brown oxide, viridian green. I've got out some transparent red oxide, ultramarine blue. I've got out some Hooker's green because I want a nice dark greeny color for around the rose, some Payne's gray, and this is like some alizarin, and it's just an alizarin hue. It's really, I should throw the tube away and get a new tube of alizarin because it's really not the greatest. So anyhow, so normally I'd kind of just go at it, but I know I'm trying to gear these little tutorials to people starting out, and some days I feel like I'm starting out again. So I'm just sort of gonna sketch the rose a little so I know where I want to leave this area kind of lighter. So I'm just gonna kind of look at the outline of the rose so I can get an idea of where it wants to go in this little canvas, this is actually a gesso board, those ampersand gesso boards, and you can get them, at Blick Art, in like 4 packs, or Jerry's Artorama, either one of those. And so I'll even kind of sometimes for fun sketch some of those leaves, and some leaves kind of going around. So you can kind of go like that just to start off so that you kind of know where your little rose is going to fit. And then I might just block in around the rose just so I have that contrast when I start to add the white. So I'll just use some of that. I'm using some of that Hooker's green because it's very dark, and just kind of block around it. So sometimes I start off by doing a wash over the whole board, but today I'm just gonna kind of block out around this white rose so I can really keep some of that white undertone. You can paint over where the leaves were because I'm going to paint them back on easily later. And then I used a little too much water, so I kind of go between oil and acrylic. So sometimes I use the water the way I would the turp and I go a little bit crazy. So I'm just going to, and also this gesso board surface is a little bit more non-absorbing. So just going to lift some of that off. And I'm using these, what are they? Princeton Summit brush. So now that I've kind of got that darker edge, when I go and make my marks with the light paint, they'll really show up. So what you want to do when you paint a rose is you want to mix up some nice warm whites. So how you do that is you're going to use some white and you're going to use some viridian green and yellow ochre. See that yellow ochre and that viridian already makes a nice kind of cool rosy green, so that could be in the shadows, you know. And then you want to add some brown oxide. So I'm going to kind of keep that pool actually. I like that for the kind of cool greens. And so you got this trio of color that makes these nice warm whites. You got the white, you've got the yellow ochre, the transparent brown oxide, and the viridian. And that's how you get that nice warm, you know, really nice warm white. So now I'm just gonna kind of using my brush, make some of those rosy edges. I have a new puppy and her name is Rose. So when I say this, she's probably thinking, what are you talking about me so much for? So I'm just kind of making that edge. It doesn't need to be perfect, you know. We're just trying to learn kind of the colors and kind of the basics here. And so I'm just kind of getting that fluffy rose look. And once you kind of get that in there, you want to get some, for the center, there's that really glowing kind of yellow kind of center. I'm going to get some of that Indian yellow and just dab it in the center there. And I'm going to add a little Indian yellow and I'm going to add a little red oxide because it gets really warm in the center and the whites get really cool as they go out. So you can kind of already get that dimension even though I've just got flat, you know, no, I haven't created any petals yet or anything. And then I just want to test my values. So when you're working with white flowers, you need to know that your whites have like a mid-tone range like this or to a dark because you want those white petals to stand out. So, and I don't use pure white, so I'll use white and a tiny dab of Indian yellow, so you get sort of a more white with a little bit of color actually stands out brighter. So I'm going to just test that by putting a kind of where there's a real bright petal in the picture. I'll just sort of test that out. So I'm going to say that that's pretty good. Could be my darker values. I can always go in and really get that shadow later, but I think that shows up pretty good. So if you want to make some of those shadow petals show up more, just get your original mix and add a little more pigment. So a little more viridian, a little more brown oxide, and a little more yellow ochre, less white, you'll get a darker version of these colors. And if just so anyone knows, I use the same colors in oil. So if you want to paint along in oil, you can. So I'm going to just darken some of these where I see there's a little more shadow. I'm going to add a little bit more of this darker warm white mix. So just kind of add that in where I see it. Basically, I'm just sort of adding it to the base. I'm not really painting anything specific. There. So now that's a little bit darker value in there. My whites will show up more, so I can go and test it. That really, stands out brighter now. So you'll get that dimension that you want when you get those whites in there correctly. Like if you get them in there too white, you'll go to put the highlight on and it's like putting white on this palette paper. You just can't see it. So I'm just going to get some white, and I'm going to look at the center. I'll add a little bit of that yellow ochre mix, and I'm going to look at that center and just sort of dab some of those little lines that you see in the reference photo. You'll see some of those little edges where that flower has, just it's all like a cinnamon bun. In the middle, it gets tighter and tighter. And then you want to kind of use some of that white, not your brightest white, just use this color, which is a little white, little bit of that warmer, darker mixture, and a little bit of that yellow, Indian yellow, just to sort of keep that warmth going. And you'll notice I'm just dabbing some of those petal shapes around, leaving some of that darker underpaint, and then I'm going to get some of that lighter color and sort of dab a few edges around just to show that, there's some petals coming out. And so this is where you can kind of get a little more specific here and there. Just sort of build a few petals that look really solid in shape more. But still, you'll notice I'm keeping it really loose. I don't want to have I don't want it to get super tight. I don't want to make like a hyper realistic painting, especially because I'm trying to gear this to people who've never really painted a rose, let alone a white rose. White is more of a challenge. So, and I'm leaving the shadow in between so you can see these petals here are mostly in the shadow, but there's a little bit of edge there. You'll see that in the reference photo. And there's a bit of a shadow here. And just sort of use my brush to sort of create that little. So I'm not really, it's very, just sort of loose, and I'm not really getting into the exact details. So this petal's in the shadow. And then I'll go in and get more white and sort of just dab some more highlights on the edges of the rose there. So it's looking very rosy. So now that you've got like some of those real bright petals on there, you can sort of start to, you can pick out a few petal edges that you want to make sure kind of go the way you want to see them, like here and there. But now I'm going to stop on the light, because if you keep adding the light to it, it's going to get overpainted on that value. So you want to look at now what you can do is go back in, and you can really see squint down with your eyes and see sort of this warm yellowy color and some of these kind of these purpley shadow colors. So I'll mix up something different now, just to add a little bit. I'll add a little blue, cobalt, or this is ultramarine blue. So I'm going to add a little bit of ultramarine blue to that darker mixture. A little bit of red oxide, so it kind of grays it down a little. And you can add a little bit of that blue here and there in the shadow here. And just sort of adding some of that blue down here where I see those kind of shadow colors. And then same with the yellow. You can go back in and get some of that Indian yellow and that red oxide, and just sort of really squint down and look at where it's a little darker in the center, and kind of put in some of that Indian yellow back into the center. And then I'm going to go in and get something a little darker to sort of get those shadows to stand back out. So I'll get some ultramarine blue and red oxide here and some yellow ochre, and that'll kind of make a little bit of a darker value, just to really get some of those, put a few of those in there just to show that there's some real shadow in there, and those petals will stand out more. Get some of that up here. So you can see it's starting to add a little depth to some of those petals. And kind of blend it in a little. Okay, now when I get to this stage, I want to go back in and kind of get something a little darker in the center. So I'll get some yellow ochre, maybe some of that brown oxide, and just I want to get a few darker marks still in there. So yellow ochre, brown oxide, a little bit of viridian, and oh, it's not really, I got too much white mixed in there. So viridian, yellow ochre, and transparent brown oxide, and I'm just gonna make sure I get some darker marks in that center area still. So you can kind of blend it a bit. And so now I'm going to go, I've gone back and forth with the mid-tone and the light and the dark. Now I'm going to go back to the light, get some white again, maybe a tiny bit of that Indian yellow, and I'm going to kind of scoop up some of that paint and really get some of those highlights on the edge there. It really shows the sunlight's hitting those edges. So you can't get the light to show unless you see the dark. So that's really important. And it's kind of the way life is. You don't know what you got till it's gone, and you don't see it in painting. You need the dark to show off the light. So you got this, and now you're starting to see the light source a little more, and the light comes across, and there's sort of some bright spots in the middle. And you can add a little bit of light to the blue, but just make sure it's got blue and it's not light, or it'll flatten it back out again. So you can have some lighter spots in the shadow, but it has to be dulled down, with the blue. Otherwise, it starts to compete with the rest of the flower. And now I'm going to show you how to put in the background and how that can really help. So I'm going to get this Hooker's green, and you can use sap too. I just have put out this because it's real dark. Not many people use it, but it's a very blacky green. And you can really start to bring out some of those shapes. So you can look at your reference photo and cut in some of those edges. So you've got, kind of cut in some of those interesting, it just looks more interesting when you cut in the background like this. You can do this with anything, that you're painting. So now you're starting to see the values more. And you can just use the edge of your brush to kind of cut in some sharper edge like that. And you can use a little yellow ochre, some viridian, and you'll make, kind of a lighter green and put in a few lighter leaves. So get those different layers of interest there. So and just get more yellow ochre. If you have cad yellow light, you can add that to make some lighter. I'm just keeping it real simple today. And you can just add a little white and viridian and some yellow ochre to make a little lighter. Maybe added some Indian yellow just to lighten it up a little more. And you'll notice I'm keeping the leaves pretty loose too. I don't want it to start, getting too tight, because if you look at the reference photo, you could just kind of look at all the different colors of green coming through, and not worry about it being exact. So now you get the dark in, you can go back and get that white, add a little Indian yellow to it, and you can really go and add some real bright edges here and there. So Maybe a little bit of a light green edge here and there. Okay, so I think that, kind of does it. You can, once it's all dry, you could glaze it. So you could use, I've got a little bit of this glazing. It's just acrylic medium. You can get it. It's called, acrylic gloss medium. And I just put some in the corner of my palette here. It's just a liquid medium. And you could add a little bit of that Indian yellow to it. And now you've got a nice glaze. See if I can do it on the wet paint, but when it's dry, it works really nice. I just blooped my background in there. But anyways, if your painting is dry, just let it dry and then mix. You could even use a little water and just use a little bit of that pigment in some liquid medium or water, and you can glaze over some of the lighter petals, and it really warms them up. And you can use a little ultramarine blue. Yeah, mine's too wet, and just kind of glaze over. Maybe I'll let this dry and I could add that to the video later. So yeah, that's what I'll do. So for now, I'll just leave it at that. And yeah, thanks for watching, and I look forward to the next video. And yeah, I'll come back later and maybe show the glazing in a separate video. So thanks for watching.